and a lot of people were tossing around, blackballed or collusion, and NFL owners saying, "Oh, we're going to team up and agree to not draft Shedeur to prove a point." As someone who has worked in the NFL for so many years, what is your response to that kind of talk?
That's nonsense, because um, teams want to add to their roster players that give them a chance to win. And that desire to have the best players overruns any other conspiracy theory. Uh, Teams will draft a player who's got great talent on the field. He just didn't find a match in the process. He needed one of those teams, whether it was Cleveland or Pittsburgh or New Orleans or the New York Giants, who were all looking for quarterbacks. Somehow in the scouting process, he never cemented the belief in those franchises that he was the one to take them for the next 10 to 12 years. I mean, he can still be a dominant player. It's just a slower path. But honestly, when I have a young quarterback and he's got the chance to learn behind someone like Joe Flacco, who knows it all, if the people in front of him are generous mentors like Alex Smith was to Patrick Mahomes, um, that route of taking a few years in can be much better for the long-term career of the player than getting pushed out as a starter the first year, throw a couple interceptions, and all of a sudden you're a bust. First of all, the expectations were inflated to the point that never matched reality. So I think Coach Sanders said he's a top 5 pick. And so that perception went around. But to get drafted high for a franchise quarterback position takes a team falling in love with an individual player and looking to build their whole future around him. So, first of all, he was 13 and 12. He didn't have the winning record of other people. There were people who felt his mechanics were not great and needed work. And then the process itself, he didn't work out at the scouting combine. And there were a series of meetings that play an essential role in teams getting excited about a player. And evidently, it's anecdotal, but those didn't go quite so well. So we would prepare a player for the draft by having him deal with a former general manager and have that general manager ask all the questions that would occur in the one-on-one meeting at the combine between a player and the franchise. I'm not sure whether he did that, but some of the feedback from teams was that they felt he was arrogant, they felt he was dismissive. He limited in the scouting process the teams he interacted with, but you have to find, as an agent, one or two teams that you're pretty sure are going to take the player before having him exposed in a way. So he was analyzed and reanalyzed, but no one came forward. So there were draft projections that showed him going to New Orleans or going to Pittsburgh, but you never saw those teams step forward and say, he's our guy. So, and then once a player slips before his perceived slot in the draft, other teams are spread across the country and they start to think something might be wrong. There's some fact they don't know about. There's some reason why the player's not being selected. And so, because they're cut off from any way to research that on draft day, it's the case of the slipping draft pick. And then his father's a wonderful player and a amazing personality, but there might have been perceptions that the father would somehow, like in the Lonzo Ball situation, be too involved. And so I think a combination of those factors, but again, no team falling in love with him during the scouting process and prioritizing him as a top quarterback. So now he's the second rookie quarterback that Cleveland drafted in the same draft. And having said all of this, the fact that he went in the fifth round doesn't mean that his future's foreclosed. He can still go on and be an outstanding player. And it figures that whether it's Kenny Pickett or Baltimore's old quarterback,
Joe
uh,
Flacco.
that whether it's Joe Flacco or Kenny Pickett, that he won't start the first year, and that can be a really good thing. Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Philip Rivers are all examples of people who didn't start for 1 or 2 years and still went on. So now he's just a draft pick like any other draft pick. The players picked at the top of the first round get 25 to $27 million signing bonuses. And the first pick last year got a $44 million totally guaranteed contract. Now, by the time you get to the fifth round, the bonus is in the hundreds of thousands, and the package is significantly larger. What makes that less significant this year is NILs, so that you have a group of players coming into the league that have already earned a fair amount of revenue, so they're not completely dependent on their pro contract. Um, so he didn't have an agent, so he didn't have someone interacting with teams who could have maybe given him a more realistic assessment of who was going to take him. If I am sitting on draft day with Patrick Mahomes, I've got a pretty good idea that the Kansas City Chiefs are really interested in him, that behind them, the New Orleans Saints or the Houston Texans are teams that have told me that they're going to pick me. So we don't go into draft day with like a blank slate. We go knowing that there are certain teams, and if those teams don't happen to pick him, then it can be a slide. There's a massive amount of scouting information that flows between agents and teams. And it's a combination of character, it's a combination of leadership. This is the key position. So there's feedback going on and on. If teams perceive, and I don't know this to be true, that he was arrogant and entitled, that's not a good look for teams. But you would pick that up as an agent in the scouting process. Teams would be telling you he had a not so great interview. Can we re-interview? And then you try to put together another interview. Teams would be telling you we have doubts about arm strength or reading defenses or 3, 5, 7 step drop, but that information will be coming, and it gives you the ability to adjust in the scouting process. But if you know going into draft night that no team has told you they're definitely taking you, if you're available when their pick comes, you get a pretty good idea that it could be a long night.
Would you ever be interested in if Shedor's like, look, I gotta get an agent at this point? Is that someone you would like to represent?
Oh, I think he's going to be a really good pro, and I think that if you look at the statement he made post draft, it was humble, it was heartfelt, and that's the type of player you look for. But I think Deion Sanders is the person. Normally, you're talking as an agent to the parents, not to the player for a while. It's not till the end of the process the player comes into the mix. So I'm not campaigning for that job, but I certainly think he's a worthy client for someone. And look, the shock of this is that he now has something to prove, and he's going to be, not that he wasn't motivated before, but his motivation will be on steroids to try and prove to the league that they were wrong.